even with child sex trafficking, only 1% of that crime is ever even reported. And we have something like 500,000 kids every day that are being trafficked.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report here. Thank you so much for tuning in. That was Josh Peck, and he's got a new movie out called Silent Cry, which we talk about in this interview. Thanks so much for being here. Just a quick word from this interview sponsor. Guys, I've recently started taking ageless multi-collagen because I found out that after the age of 20, collagen production in our bodies decreases 10% every decade. So I add a scoop of ageless multi-collagen every morning to my coffee, and it really tastes great. The advantage is younger looking skin, more vibrance, and more energy. And I've seen a big difference when I look in the mirror. Ageless multi-collagen works by providing powerful nutritional support that promotes skin, hair, nails, joints, bone, teeth, and gut health. Get Ageless multi-collagen for 51% off plus free shipping by going to healthwithsgt.com or by clicking the link, which I'll provide below this interview. And welcome back, friends. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's great to have you guys back. I think you're going to enjoy this one very much. I have on the line Josh Peck. He's an author, a speaker, and a researcher. He's also a filmmaker. His latest movie is Silent Cry, The Darker Side of Trafficking. Josh joins us right now. How are you, Josh?
Doing good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Josh, your timing on this movie couldn't be any better. I mean, everywhere we look, we see signs of human trafficking, child sex trafficking. It's the biggest story in the world for the past 3, 4, 5 years. We've got Pizzagate we can talk about. Keith Raniere of Nexium is about to be sentenced later this month. Claire Bronfman was just sentenced to 6 years and 9 months. Of course, she'll do her time in a minimum security prison in Connecticut. She gets the cakewalk prison. Meanwhile, people like Hillary Clinton, John Podesta, you fill in the blanks, Tony Podesta, James Alefantis, these people all walk free. Isn't that interesting, Josh?
Yeah, but unfortunately, that's the state of our legal system when it comes to this crime. If you have enough money, if you have enough power and influence, they'll look the other way. If you don't, if you're being led to slaughter, for example, this kind of happened with Epstein, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but at first, Epstein was in the spotlight for a long time, for years, with this crime. But he kept getting slaps on the wrist. Then finally, when he was a threat to the actual elite, then he gets offed. And so that's the kind of thing that you see. Our actual legal system around this thing is severely broken. It's way too lax when it comes to the abuse of children. A lot of times we'll see sentences for some crazy amount of time, hundreds of years even, for all these victims. But then typically they'll serve maybe a year and they'll get off on community service or they'll get off on good behavior. And that's even if they see the inside of a prison cell. So it is totally messed up. Unfortunately, this issue, like everything else in our culture, has become politicized. And it seems that politics is usually what determines the type of sentence that a perpetrator of these crimes will get.
Well, one thing we can be very grateful for, and I pray that we get another 4 years, is that the man in the White House is the man in the White House and not Hillary Clinton.
Absolutely.
Josh, let me ask you this. Do you think for one second Hillary Clinton would have signed an executive order on combating human trafficking and online child exploitation? Do you think for 1 second she would have signed an executive order blocking the property of persons involved in such activities? Do you think for 1 second Backpage would have been shut down if Hillary Clinton was in the White House?
Absolutely not, because that's a threat to her and it's a threat to her husband. And unfortunately, that's the kind of thing that you see in politics. And this is why there are people who try, and nothing sticks to the guy, but there are people who try to throw these kinds of accusations at Trump, but it doesn't stick because he's actively fighting against this issue. If he was involved in it, he'd be fighting against his own, position. But that's why if it was Hillary that won the presidency, I don't think we would see 2020 as the year where all of this is actually coming to light finally. And we've all seen this. 2020 has really been the year for actually, like Elizabeth Fisher says, who's actively fighting against child sex trafficking. She says 2020 is the year for 2020 vision when it comes to child sex trafficking and pedophilia and all that. And she's absolutely correct. But why is it 2020? Why is it this year? Why wasn't it 4 years ago, 10 years ago? This has been an ongoing problem really since ancient times. But there hasn't been a time in human history where this has not been a problem. So why is it this year? And I think it's largely because of who we have in the White House, because we have somebody who's not a part of this system. We have we have an outsider who's actually willing to do unpopular things and things that even go against some of the people that he might be, in political power with. When he first got elected, most of the Republicans were against him. Now some of them have finally come around, which is good. So, he's actually fighting this battle. He's fighting an uphill battle. He's got a few loyal supporters in politics, but like I said, he's fighting an uphill battle. That's why it takes all of us to get involved in this issue, make sure we're informed with accurate information, because there's a lot of stuff out there that's not true, and do our own part to hold ourselves individually responsible for the state of the country that we live in.
Well, it's never been more obvious what the deep state is. It was Peter Dale Scott that coined that term, the deep state. Now it's a term people use pretty much every day. It's part of the vernacular. But what we're talking about when we talk about the deep state is we're talking about the shadow government, the shadow powers that will be controlling Joe Biden if he becomes president. Donald Trump has actually talked about these shadow powers, the people behind Joe Biden, the people that will actually be president if Joe Biden is quote-unquote elected. So we know what President Trump has been up against from day one. On Tuesday night, President Trump authorized the total declassification of every document related to the Russia hoax. So Josh, we know Hillary and the DNC paid for the Russiagate hoax. They paid for the dossier. Comey, Clapper, Brennan, and Rice were complicit in it. Brennan briefed Obama and Biden about the plan. They all knew it, and they all need to be held accountable. So we pray for President Trump running into November. Do you think the Democrats will be able to steal this election?
I don't know. I always try to maintain optimism when it comes to these things, because we hear about the silent majority. And so, part of me is like, okay, good. Well, we can at least rest in that most of the country probably isn't as crazy as the extremists make it out to seem. But then again, it's called the silent majority for a reason. They're silent. That's not a good thing either. So part of me thinks, like with this election especially, the last election, I think that a whole generation of people kind of grew up with just Democrat leaders, for 8 years. And so they grew up with that, didn't really know what was at stake. And I think a lot of them stayed at home and didn't vote because of that. So Trump won, obviously. I don't know if that's going to be the case this time around, because there have been a lot of people on the left that have been told, if Trump gets reelected, it's going to be the end of the world, which obviously we know the opposite is true. If anything, it's not going to be the end of the world, but it's not going to be good. So I don't know if they're especially motivated this time around to vote or not, but I would say right now I would be surprised if Biden legitimately won. If Biden is declared the winner, I'm going to be immediately looking for, okay, what did they do? Because something's off. He either won by like a thin margin, or something got screwed up here, because Trump has so many supporters, people willing to not listen to the hype about the pandemic, about the virus that's out there, and actually go to his rallies, in the tens of thousands. And you see Biden's rallies, there's like 5 people, and they'll say, well, it's because they're afraid of the virus. And I'm like, well, how's that going to work on voting day, which is obviously why they're trying to push this mail-in ballot stuff. So I don't know. We're right at the door of November, but in many ways, it's still too early to tell. It's such a strange time.
Well, I mentioned the deep state and the shadow government. I want to frame that up as we turn our attention back to your film, Silent Cry, The Darker Side of Trafficking, because of that element, that CIA element. Right now, Gina Haspel, the director of the CIA, is trying to block any further declassification of these Russiagate documents, because the CIA was involved, and they're involved in the cover-up. And I think that's a good segue back to your film. I was glad to see you cover the finders in your film. Guys, listen to this. Douglas Ammerman and James Michael Howell were pulled over in a van and arrested in February of 1987 in Tallahassee after witnesses reported seeing them in Myers Park with 6 scruffy children between the ages of 2 and 11. 6 weeks later, after an investigation that went all the way to Washington, D.C., the men were released from custody. The state dropped charges against the men in March. And to this day, the CIA calls it all a nothing burger. What do you make of the finders and their connection to the CIA, Josh?
Yeah, I started the movie with this story because I wanted to dispel the myth immediately that we can just sit back and trust the government to handle this problem for us. Most people today don't deny that there's a trafficking problem in America, and people will react to it to varying degrees. Some people think that it's not that big of a deal. It doesn't happen that often. Some people think that, it probably happens quite often, but the government has people on that, and they'll take care of it. What can we do at home? We can best serve by just staying out of the way. I wanted to dispel that immediately, and like you mentioned, this case goes all the way back to 1987 at least. It might go all the way back to 1950 or even before that, because there was a member of the Finders cult that was found working at the CIA, and whether that was done intentionally or not, we could speculate about. But a lot of this was covered up. So basically what you just said was what the public was told back in the 80s and up until just recently. So not much. Why was the case called off? Was there anything really here? But by the way the official story sounds, it sounds like these kinds of stories happen all the time. But I wanted to open the movie with this to show that actually it's unique, but unfortunately, it's probably not as unique as we would think it is, and we can't trust the government to solve this problem because corruption runs deep. So there's a lot that we don't know because the documents that are available are heavily redacted, but we do show the documents in the film, and we do actually get them right from the FBI website. So these are legit, like these are actual documents, government documents. They've recently been released just now, basically, just a few months ago. And it shows that there was definitely some kind of cover-up and possibly direct involvement going on here. So we tell the whole story in the movie, but we can hit some of the highlights here. The police brought these two men and children into custody after the police were called. The two men were uncooperative. They didn't provide ID for themselves or the kids. They were even unable to prove that the children even belonged to them. And while they were in custody, it was discovered that there was another Finders case in Washington, D.C. So they found these two people were involved with something called the Finders. They found another case of the Finders in Washington, D.C. So police ended up searching properties belonging to this mysterious Finders cult. And they found on the property, and this is directly from the documents. Like, we don't really go into a lot of speculative stuff. We just show what's on the documents. Hand-drawn pentagrams, over 100 animal bones, and some undisclosed pieces of evidence of satanic cult rituals. What those are, we don't know because, again, a lot of it's redacted. But they also found cages that there was eyewitnesses there that said they were used to keep children in during their visits. So they discovered documents on the Finders property containing instructions for obtaining children, impregnating women, purchasing, kidnapping, trading children. The documents expressed a suspicion that the Finders were being used by the U.S. government on a state and federal level. So there was reason to believe that this wasn't the first time they were discovered, that our government knew about it and was actually utilizing them in some way. And there are investigators mentioned in these official documents, though names have been redacted, who became absolutely convinced that the Finders were part of an organized child abuse scheme that was being covered up by the State Department and FBI's Foreign Counterintelligence Section. Now, there was actual proof of sexual abuse of the children that they had in custody that from these two men, explicit. And the police questioned the children after they brought them in. They questioned the children that were with the two men at that park. The kids described seeing women walking around naked at their home. They described their leader, called the Game Caller, whose real name was Marion Petty. Petty would tell the kids to do strange things like read random bulletin boards, take notes, and even more disturbingly, babysit children. But during the interview, the children were clearly not well. They were ill. They were extremely hungry. They were so sick and malnourished that they urinated and defecated on the floor. So because of that, the children were medically examined, and at least two of them, and we only have first names, Max and Mary, two of them were confirmed cases of sexual abuse. And the details and evidence of the sexual abuse, it's probably too explicit for something that will probably go up on YouTube such as this, but we do include the full details, including the original offense reporting form in the movie, not for sensational purposes, but they're in the documents, and we wanted to be truthful about what was in the documents. And it's pretty explicit. form detailing the abuse from the medical examination. And this is insane. It has an original date of February 4th, 1987, and we even know that a copy was made on February 9th, 1987. So this report existed February 4th, 1987. On February 18th, 2 weeks after the confirmation of sexual abuse was discovered, the entire case against the finders was dropped. Some shadowy higher up, apparently, there's not a lot of details about who called the investigation off, just somebody up there called it off. No arrests were made. The two men had all charges against them dropped. The children were even sent back with no attempts of rehabilitation or even foster care, nothing like that. It actually says in the documents that they were sent back with people who claimed to be their parents. Who knows what claimed to be means? Because again, these two men, at least, they didn't have ID or anything. There was an affidavit written either on or after February 5th of 1987. So this would be a day or more after the child sex abuse was discovered. And that affidavit stated that the children were all examined for sexual abuse, but the results were not available at this time. Even though today, they got away with it then, but today we have clear evidence that an offense report was made a day earlier. So the results were available at the time when the documents say that they weren't. So it was a clear lie. It was a clear cover up. They didn't care about these kids or what was going on. There were a lot of things that came out after that. It was, when documents were explained why this thing was called off, why no arrests were made, and any previous charges were dropped, it actually states that there was no evidence of child sexual exploitation, no evidence of kidnapping and related crimes, no evidence of satanic activity, even though, again, we can see in the documents there clearly was, and that's because now we have the documents. So it was also reported that if they just want to live their lives like that, that's how they want to live their lives. That there was nothing objectively wrong or abusive or neglectful, even though the police and medical reports show that they were starved, they were being withheld medical attention, and they were sexually abused. So what happened afterwards, some unnamed investigators did try to expose this. And then there were a couple in years later, there were some researchers that actually tried to expose this too. And unfortunately, it's just difficult to get people's attention on this. This should be a huge story, but even today, it's hard to get people really interested. So all of the evidence was ignored and dismissed without any real answer given at the time. So we know there was at least a cover-up, but why the cover-up? That's another question. The best that we have in the documents is speculation from some unnamed individual who appears to be close to the case, who expressed his suspicions in an official report from the domestic security branch of the police department in D.C. So he writes that he believed the finders were utilized by the CIA as a disinformation service. He says that they are capable of destructive and illegal activities. He refers to them as a cult, so that's why I call them the finders cult. He says he didn't believe sexual abuse of the children was originally planned, but it did spring up later due to sick and demented subjects who belonged to the cult. But by that time, they're already working with the government, so the government looked the other way and covered it up. He believed the shaping of the children was a planned experiment. He actually refers to it as that, a planned experiment such as the Nazis toward a perfect society. He also said he didn't believe that the finders ever disbanded, which makes us wonder, are they still active in the government today? There's no reason to think that they're not, because, again, in 87, they got away with it. It also makes us wonder what horrific levels of corruption are going on in the government right now that won't be released for another 30 years. And that's why I really wanted to start the film with this story, because it shows us there's no reason to believe that the government just cleaned its act up in 1987 on the state, local, or even the federal level. They got away with it then, and now we're having documents released. So now we know about it, but again, there's not a big public outcry about it. Most people don't even know about this case. Very few do. And so it would be unreasonable to assume that since then the government just decided, well, we're not going to have any part in sexually exploiting children anymore. We're going to stop now that we got away with it. No, if somebody gets away with something, they're going to keep doing it, and it's going to grow and it's going to get worse. So it's more reasonable to assume that this has continued. I don't know if the finders themselves are still active or not, but I'm sure some form of what was initiated back then, possibly as early as the 50s, still exists. And I think that it's even stronger more today than it was. I mean, now these people have a whole culture in America behind them who are trying to push for the normalization of pedophilia, push for the sexualization of children. It's in entertainment, it's in the media, it's everywhere. And because of that, I think that it's reasonable to assume, this probably is still very active in the government, and it's bleeding out into the culture, into society, even into our small towns. It's just everywhere in America now. So that's why we wanted to start the movie with that.
Well, yeah, it is everywhere now, and Representative Steve Scalise made a PSA warning people about human trafficking being a plague across this country, across the United States, saying it takes place in every major American city. It's a real blight, and it needs to be brought to an end. Now, here's the thing about the finders. There were allegations of satanic worship and child pornography, and it was all covered up. We see this time and time and time again, the Franklin cover-up. The Hampstead cover-up in the UK, Jimmy Savile, okay? He was allowed to abuse children for 3 decades while being best chums with the Prince Charles. Sir Edward Heath, a prime minister, right? Sat regularly with the Queen, had regular FaceTime with the Queen, implicated in the murders of 16 children, but only after he died. And we now know, because of Jeffrey Epstein, that these types of things take place and are encouraged or covered up so that intelligence agencies can blackmail, I think, politicians and powerful people. But I want to get back to the satanic element, because time and time again, there is a satanic element to this stuff. For instance, Sir Edward Heath, it is said that he was involved in a satanic cult that murdered as many as 16 children. What have you found in your research? What is the connection between Satanism and child trafficking? Because certainly the two things can exist independently, but so often they're combined. Satanic worship and child sex trafficking, and satanic ritual abuse, by the way.
Yes, definitely. And we actually have 2 or 3 people in the film who work with survivors of satanic ritual abuse. And we have more in the bonus features. Actually, we have satanic ritual abuse survivors in the bonus materials that's offered with the film at skywatchtvstore.com if people want to get it there. And I want to mention real quick, too, just because I mentioned the website, all the profits of this film go to Whispering Ponies Ranch, which is a ministry dedicated to helping children who have been rescued from child sex trafficking, helping them heal through the use of therapy ponies. And there's a bunch of videos at Whispering Ponies Ranch about how all that works.
That's great.
But all the profits of this film go to that. So if people go to skywatchtvstore.com and buy the movie there with all the bonus materials, the profits of that will go there. People can also find it on Amazon, and they can stream it there. And I ask, however people end up watching it, if they could leave a review, that would be very helpful. We're trying to get this movie to go viral, because it's not for my fame or fortune. Again, profits go to Whispering Ponies Ranch. It's to raise awareness to help these kids. The only reason that this has been allowed to continue is because people are either unaware, or they're just ignorant, or they don't care enough to do anything about it, or they don't think it's as big of a deal as it really is. So I'm going to preface the occult things by saying, even if you don't believe that there's an occult connection, watch the film and you'll have to at least admit, yes, child sex trafficking is a much bigger problem than I previously thought, and I need to get involved, because there's no such thing as sitting on the fence. Being on the fence is where the pedophiles want you. If you're inactive, you're a part of the problem. So I want to preface it by saying that because the occult connection is kind of seen as just conspiracy theory land, and it's brushed off. The same thing happened in the Satanic Panic. They thought that because there was some sensationalism involved with it, that must mean that all of it is fake, and we actually deal with the Satanic Panic in the film as well. While some of the things in there were definitely exaggerated, there was some truth going on too. There were really children being abused, and we're seeing the same thing today. There is sensationalism around things like the occult, but there's a truth that is actually going on. So the connection is, a trafficker doesn't care who they're selling a kid to.
Hey, John.
So yes.
Well, let me just jump in and say one thing real quick.
Sure.
They used to be able to get away with that. Okay, the mainstream media, Time Magazine, Newsweek, when they were still magazines, they put covers Satanic Panic, right? They would try to downpedal all of this stuff. They used to be able to get away with that. They can't get away with that anymore. All right?
Right.
The Comet Ping Pong, the James Alefantis Instagram page, Jimmy Comet, Kill Room, just rinse it off when you're done, looks like fun, hashtag murder. No, they can't get away with it anymore. And that's why people are waking up all over the world. The Hampstead cover-up. Again, I just interviewed Wilfred Wong, a satanic ritual abuse researcher for nearly 3 decades. Has it from a high-level source in the EU that many of the leaders in the EU are Satanists. All right, back to you, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great example of how this works, because they can't hide it anymore, and I think they know that, and so they're working overtime. I mean, that's why you see so much stuff against, like, the, labeling the whole Q movement as nothing but one of these silly conspiracy theories. You see that overtime in all of the media, even the suppression of information now on social media, blocking Q groups and things like that. When I look at it, who are the people that are actually involved in this fight and actually trying to save these kids? It's not the mainstream media. It's like the Q community. It's people like that. And say what you will about them, but at least they're trying to do something. So I mean, if I have to align myself with one group or another, I'm definitely going to go with those who actually respect the sanctity of life and want to help children and all that stuff. So they're working overtime to try to cover this up. But you're right. A lot of these guys, they're old timers. They don't realize the world that they live in anymore. They think they can still pander to people, and people won't realize it because they don't know how vast the internet is, how fast information can get out there. So that is a good thing about our age, is there is evidence out there about the connection between the occult and child sex trafficking, and it is hard to ignore. A lot of people will say, well, it's just based on eyewitness testimony, so it's he said, she said. But you wouldn't use that same burden of proof if it came to somebody that or if I told you, like, hey, I went to the store today, you're not going to really question that. The reason that people question it is because they think it's a fantastic thing. Like if I said I was attacked by a velociraptor on the way to the store today, you would probably question that, and you would be correct to. So the unfortunate thing is, in our society, the occult connection with child sex trafficking or satanic ritual abuse, that is seen as like the dinosaur attack, when it should be seen as, it unfortunately is really common. And we know it is because the eyewitness testimonies of children who have been rescued all across the country, really all across the world, they all report the same thing. So how are they doing that? It's either the children are somehow networking, which I don't know how that could happen, but children 6 years old and younger are networking and telling each other what to say. So they're all drawing the same symbols of what they saw, the satanic symbols. They're all telling the same story about people in robes and the things that they said, or that, they'll even dress up as Jesus when they're abused. And it's either they're making all this up and networking somehow that we adults have not figured out, or the investigators themselves are lying, which means they're putting their entire reputation and their careers on the line. Because a lot of the people that are involved in this, that are helping rescue children and who are advocates for child sex trafficking victims and satanic ritual abuse victims, this is what they do. This is their job. This is how they make their livelihood. We have some of them in the film talking about it. So what would be the purpose of their lying when if it's such a fantastic thing, it would be easy to get caught, and then they're out of a job and they don't have a reputation anymore, and they got to go work at the corner store or something like that. So that doesn't seem plausible, or it actually is happening, and that to me seems to be the explanation that puts all these pieces together, makes everything fit. So a lot of people will ask, well, if it is happening then, and it is this kind of fantastic thing, why don't we hear about it more? Why is it seen as fantastic? Why isn't it seen as common as it is? And there's a lot of reasons for that. But first, it's a lot more common to be able to prove an instance of child sex trafficking than it is with occult involvement in child sex trafficking. So even with child sex trafficking, only 1% of that crime is ever even reported. And we have something like 500,000 kids every day that are being trafficked, actively trafficked, and that sometimes involves kidnapping. Sometimes that involves kids that the parents don't even know the child is being trafficked because they're allowed to return home. That happened with a survivor that we have in the film. Her name is Alanka Deaton. And she really works now at the front lines of this fight. But she's a trafficking victim. She was allowed to, for a little while, she was allowed to go home. Her mom had no idea what was going on. So that kind of thing happens. But of the children that are actively involved in sex trafficking today, there's something like 500,000 of them in our country alone, and only 1% of that crime's ever reported. So it's already a rare thing to be reported on. It's not a rare occurrence. It's rare that it's reported on. So of that 1%, it's even rarer for somebody where if there's occult elements in it, who will be taken seriously. Because where's the first thing that a police officer or an investigator is going to say who doesn't have any background in satanic ritual abuse, they're gonna wonder, well, where is the evidence? Well, what evidence could you possibly expect the child to have? All they have, I mean, they escaped with their lives. All they have is their eyewitness testimony. So that's why it's not as common to really hear about this stuff or to have it being taken seriously. But we have to remember too, there's not a lot of investigators, even if they do hear of a victim that tell this story, there's not a lot of like police officers that will put their reputations on the line by confirming there is occult activity involved with some of this stuff. So there are police officers, there are investigators who work in missing children's cases, and they do hear about this stuff, but they don't report on it. A really good example of this is my good friend Greg Reed, who we have an interview with him, not in the movie, but in one of the bonus materials. If people get the movie at skywatchtvstore.com, we did an interview with he's an investigator. His name's Greg Reed. He's not only a satanic ritual abuse survivor himself, but he's also worked in cases like that with the police. And he tells the whole story there, but a lot of investigators don't want to put their reputation on the line. It's sort of like when somebody in the military sees a UFO and they decide to not tell anybody, because they'll be seen as kind of crazy, even though there was something that happened. It's the same kind of phenomenon going on where our culture sees this as such a fantastic thing. It's frowned upon if you talk about it in society. So that's the barrier we're trying to break with the movie Silent Cry. And that's why in Silent Cry, we only really deal with stuff that can be corroborated. We don't sugarcoat anything. So it's not a typical child sex trafficking documentary where all you're going to get is a bunch of statistics. Those are good and those have their place, but that's not what Silent Cry is. Silent Cry also isn't sensationalistic. So we don't really get into areas that can't be at least now reasonably corroborated by multiple network. So we don't really go far beyond that because we don't want to give anybody an excuse to say, well, I watched Silent Cry and you know what? There's no facts in there. That's just conspiracy theory. Nobody can watch this movie and actually logically say that. We cite every source that we put in the film. So especially when we deal with the occult areas, I took great care to make sure that anything that was eyewitness testimony or something that one of the experts in the film are saying, this is what I've heard from these kids who I have worked with, I make sure to include that in the film so somebody, when they're watching it, they'll know, okay, this is eyewitness testimony. It's not like there's not video proof of this floating around somewhere, or maybe there is and we just don't know about it, but they're not claiming that. They're claiming that, okay, this is eyewitness testimony so the audience can make up their own mind if it's going to convince them or not. But like I said before, people don't even have to accept the occult part of it to know that this is a big problem. They should accept the occult part of it because it's horrific. And also real quickly, and just to put a cap on how they connect, a trafficker doesn't care what purpose a child is being sold for. He has children that he's going to sell to people. He doesn't care what the person is going to use. He doesn't ask, now you're only using this child for sexual abuse, right? None of that occult stuff. Otherwise you can take your business elsewhere. Like, that's ridiculous. That doesn't happen. The trafficker doesn't ask. The trafficker doesn't care. So if there are satanic circles in America, if there are groups and cults that follow, say, Aleister Crowley, where Aleister Crowley in his writings actually does talk about using the blood of young males for magic ritualistic purposes, and we do get into that in the film as well. If there are cults in America that take that stuff seriously, whether we believe in it or not, they do. If that does happen, where are they going to go to get a child for their magic ritual? If they have decided that they want to do that, they're going to go to a trafficker. They're most likely not going to kidnap sometimes they do, but most likely they're not going to kidnap the child themselves because they don't have to. They can find a trafficker where the kids are already kidnapped, and they can just purchase a child there. They know the trafficker's not going to ask, and then they have their child. So that doesn't always happen. Sometimes these occult groups will just straight up kidnap a kid, but a lot of times it's done through that third party, through the trafficker, knowing that the trafficker doesn't ask questions. So that's how those two connect. And like I said, the numbers are definitely lower. Like, you're going to have a lot more just straight up child abuse victims than SRA victims, but it still does happen. And if we ignore it, it's going to continue growing underground until it's as big of an epidemic as the trafficking thing is today. So that's why we have to pay attention to it now, and we have to take these eyewitness accounts seriously, at least enough to do our own research, look into it, and see if there's some validity there.
Well, I think it's very, very widespread in the UK. And,
yes.
I want to talk about Pizzagate in a minute, but in the UK, according to Wilfred Wong, we were talking about the Hampstead cover-up, and, he has it on good authority that many people in the mainstream media, many judges and police officers, people in positions of power, are involved in these satanic groups, and
yes.
therefore are eager to help cover up these types of stories. And I think it's Pizzagate that woke so many of us up in this country to the possibility that it's pretty widespread in this country too. So I want to let people know that if you buy Silent Cry, the movie here, you'll get a free Pizzagate documentary as well. Let's talk a little bit about that DVD. Let's talk a little bit about your research into Pizzagate, because one of the just cursory pieces of information that I always come back to that I think is interesting, I'm not alleging anything regarding Jake Tapper and his wife Jennifer, but I think it's very interesting that in 2015, before anybody had heard of Comet Ping Pong, any of us researchers, before any of us had really been following James Alefantis, Jennifer Tapper gave an interview to the Washingtonian, and she said that their favorite family restaurant was Comet Ping Pong, and their favorite date night restaurant for Jake Tapper and Jennifer was Buck's Camping and Fishing, or Buck's Hunting and Fishing, whatever it is. It's a James Alefantis owned deal on the same street. I just find it very curious. What do you think is some of the most interesting research about Pizzagate in that whole story? Because the mainstream media, CNN tries to say, conspiracy theorists believe that Hillary Clinton and John Podesta are running a child trafficking ring out of the basement of a pizza parlor. It's just absurd. Well, that's not really the charge. Those weren't the charges at all. Your thoughts on Pizzagate?
Yeah, and what you mentioned there about how, it was said that their family liked that restaurant, that could have been a dog whistle. And it's funny how much projection you get from these groups that you get from the left. And projection, for those who aren't familiar, it's when they know they're doing something wrong, but they don't admit it, so they'll accuse you of doing that same thing. Because to them, some of it's like unconscious, but it's like, if I'm the one accusing somebody of this, clearly I can't be, guilty of this crime. So like a good example of that is like the constant like racism charges that we hear, the accusations of racism from racists. You'll get, it's the left that's obsessed with race. Typically conservatives and people on the right don't really care much about it. We don't really think about it until it's shoved in our face through the mainstream media. But especially Christians, we just like to think of everybody as equal, and we're all creations of God. We're all made in the image of God, and that's that. Race really isn't any different than like hair color or something. Now, culture's different, but that gets into another area. But typically, you'll see, people on the left who are obsessed with race, and they're judging people based on their race. They'll treat a person of color differently than they'll treat a white person. And they act like white's not a color. But they know that they are altering their behavior towards somebody based on their race. They know that they're actually acting pretty racist. So what they're going to do, instead of dealing with that within themselves and saying, wow, I got to clean up my act, instead of that, they're going to accuse the people who aren't racist at all of being racist. So that's what projection is. So when we see these dog whistles, like Trump's always being accused of sending dog whistles, and I think that's more common on the left. And I think you might have hit on a good example of that when Comet Ping Pong's my favorite restaurant, or whatever was said. That might have been one of these projectional like dog whistle things where it's like, well, why would I say that on live TV if there was anything going on? It's because that there's something going on and you're trying to make yourself look innocent.
Well, I actually think it's worse than that. I think it's a wink wink to the establishment.
Yeah, and that's the other layer of it too.
We're the insiders. We're on your team. Here's how we're on your team. Because it gets me back to the whole James Alefantis thing. You explained to me how GQ could possibly pass him off as the 49th most powerful man in Washington, D.C. if he's just a pizza parlor owner.
Exactly.
That's what CNN says. He's just a guy who owns a pizza shop. So what'd you find in your research?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where you get those two sides of that coin. You get the dog whistle side where they are kind of dog whistling out to the elite and to people saying, hey, we'll protect you. I'm on your side. But then you also get the projection side. So yeah, we did this whole DVD with Stephen Bancars. Stephen Bancars is in the film Silent Cry. But we had some extra time, and he had done a bunch of research since it began, really, of the whole Pizzagate thing. So when people get this film, and this is called Fake News or Hidden Truths about Pizzagate, when they get the film with Silent Cry, they're not going to get a whole bunch of just rehashed stuff from 2016. He brings it up to today, 2020. At the time, James Alefantis specifically, and then other areas of it as well. But he's done a whole bunch of research into this on his own. He's an investigative researcher himself. And so we did about an hour just on this Pizzagate thing, because Pizzagate, like so many things, it's being pushed as a conspiracy theory, but it's not. I mean, people have lost their careers over this thing, which is just a shame. People who are just trying to report on the truth lose their entire careers because now it's unpopular and it's seen as a conspiracy theory when it never really was. This was something where, yes, of course, like anything, it's going to be heavily politicized, unfortunately, and there's going to be sensational stuff along with it that's just not in the realm of reasonability, if that's a word. There's going to be stuff like that, but that's with anything. So we don't deal with any of the sensational stuff. We deal with the stuff that's actually, you can actually show, like you mentioned, if this is just a pizza store owner, why is he being on, why is he listed as one of the most, influential or wealthy or whatever, in that list on GQ? Why is he being invited on all of these news networks to talk about this attack against him? And notice how nobody, even Fox News, no one, and we include clips from Fox News even in the film, no one held his feet to the fire. They went into this interview with this guy with the presupposition he's innocent, he's a victim, there's nothing going on, he's a victim of just horrible, ruthless attacks. And the reason that they say they did that was because some guy showed up to the pizza parlor with a gun. And yeah, bad idea, but does that automatically...
They did the exact same thing in the UK with Ricky Dearman. The exact same thing. A softball coddling interview meant to prop him up in the eye of the public and make him look like he was wrongly accused of doing terrible things. James Alefantis comes on Fox News, no questions about the Jimmy Comet Instagram page. Okay,
exactly.
Right then and there. If I had an Instagram page that looked like that, do you think I could even get a job?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, no kidding.
So the mainstream media always complicit in covering this stuff up.
Yeah, and what's interesting about it too is, like you mentioned, it's in the UK too. So this isn't limited. This is not just an American phenomenon. There is something deeply, deeply wrong in the human heart. Where because media companies in all these countries are going to do this. It's rampant in Australia. It's really bad there. And in the movie we don't get as much into the Australian court system, but I do in the bonus features. And man, that is where we're headed if we don't clean up our act. I mean, you have judges, Australian judges, that are looking at a case of a young girl, like I think a preteen even, young girl who was gang raped by a group of like 8 men, and anywhere from like boys to men in this group. And the judge comes away with it saying, actually publicly saying without any shame, well, the girl probably wanted it. The girl probably wanted it. We look at that here and we think that is absurd. That's horrifying. That is where America's headed if we don't start taking this problem seriously. That's not just unique to Australia. It's not just unique to the UK, unfortunately, and it's definitely not just unique to America. We can look at these countries and say, it's bad here. It's a little worse over there, but we're headed in that same direction. We're on that same trajectory. The only thing that can change it, it's not going to be waiting for the government to do something about it. It's not going to be just waiting for these media companies to grow a conscience or grow a backbone. It's not going to be any of that. It's going to be us as individuals who make up the culture deciding to shift the culture in the right direction. It's going to be us voting with our dollar. Don't spend money on sexually explicit movies. Do things like the whole cancel Netflix thing when that horrible film Cuties came out. Thank God a bunch of people canceled their Netflix subscriptions. We need to see more of that. And if enough of us decide to do those kinds of things all the time, these companies, they will cave, because many of them only care about money. And we see that on Twitter. You get 1,000, just a small group of 1,000 leftist Twitter Nazis tweeting to Nike about anything, and Nike will change the direction of their entire company to suit that small group of 1,000. These companies, they don't have any backbones. Now, it's a little more difficult on our side, because while they don't have backbones, they do have very wealthy influencers. They have people that if they did shift their companies into a wholesome direction, they would make some powerful enemies in doing that. So we do have more of a battle on our side than the 1,000, Twitter Nazis. We do have a larger battle, but I believe that we also have the numbers. I really do believe that most of America, what's called the silent majority, is actually on board with this message that we need to stop child sex trafficking and we need to take it seriously. But the problem is we need the majority to stop being silent. Yeah. We need to quit just minding our own business. And I know us as conservatives, and I'm one of them, that's what we like to do. We like to mind our own business. We want to live our lives. We want to be left alone. We don't want to bother anybody. And I get that. And there's a place for that. But when that is taken too far, this is what happens. We are giving territory over to horrible, evil people that want to abuse and destroy children for a variety of reasons. We're giving our beautiful country over to them and allowing them to destroy it. So there definitely is a place for, just being like a good conservative and staying at home and not bothering anybody. But this is not one of those areas. This is one of those areas where it's like, all right, we need to stand firm against this stuff. This is not going to happen in our country. We need to get rid of this. We need to not be buying sexually explicit movies and not be one of the 68% of Christian men who are addicted to pornography, which directly feeds the child sex trafficking trade. And if people don't believe me, there are numerous studies and articles on the direct one-to-one connection between pornography and child sex trafficking. We deal with that a little bit in the film, but I've had people ask me in private. They say, I'm one of those 68% of men, Christian men addicted to pornography, and I don't want to be, but I can't seem to stop. Well, the solution is, and I get it. I myself, I'm a former drug addict. I'm a former alcoholic. I had all sorts of addictive problems in my past, so I know how tempting addiction can be. But the way to combat any addiction is to see your addiction for what it really is. Shine it in the light of truth. So I tell people, go and look up every article, every study you can find, and there's lots of them, so you'll be busy for days. Look up every study you can find about the connection between pornography and child sex trafficking. You will learn to hate pornography. You will see that this is not just some secret thing that you have and you're only damaging yourself or you're damaging your relationship with the Lord, but you're not hurting anything. You're not hurting anybody else. You'll see that is not the case. Actually, every view that pornography gets feeds this massive child sex trafficking machine. So read those studies, read those reports, and you will learn to hate this addiction of yours. You'll even hate yourself a little bit, but it's in a good way, because that's a part of yourself you can change. We're not supposed to love every single part of ourselves. We're all fallen beings. None of us are perfect. So there are parts of ourselves that we're allowed to not like and then change, and we're supposed to be doing that. That's one of those areas. But all it is just look at it, apologize, like say sorry. I mean, like apologize in the sense of making excuses for it. Like Christian apologetics. Don't be a pornography apologist. You see a lot of people falling into that trap and saying that it's a form of free speech or something. And when you really drill into what it is, no, it's not. Especially with the child sex slave thing going on involved in it. It's just not a matter. It's only a matter of free speech if you don't look into the issue carefully and seriously. So I would encourage people to do that. There's a lot of things like that we talk about in the film that individuals can start doing in their own lives, making little changes in their own lives. Even abstaining from the temptation of sensationalism, because every time that we post something that we can't corroborate or something that, might be true, but we don't have a ton of evidence for, if we post it as if it's truth. Sometimes I post that stuff, but I'll say, hey, I don't know about this yet. I'm just posting so I can look into it more or whatever. But if you're honest about it, it's fine. But if we post it as if it is truth, then all we're doing is giving the opposite side an excuse to look at all of us as nuts. It ruins the credibility of everybody involved in this fight, unfortunately. And we see that time and time again. You see that in every country. You see that in basically every modern era of human history. That type of thing
well, let me show you
happens.
Something. Well, Josh, let me show you something here. You want to talk truth? Here's a piece of truth. So you mentioned that corrupt judge in Australia. Here's what we need to do to end this, guys. We need to be involved in our local politics, okay? Because the enemies, the people that stand against us, they're involved in their local politics. This woman, I don't know her last name, guys, Sarah, she's running for mayor in Portland, and she's leading in the polls, and she's likely to be the next mayor of Portland. Look at her skirt, okay? These are the people that stand against us. They worship communism. They worship at the altar of abortion. Now, here is her campaign manager. There's her last name, Lanarone, Sarah Lanarone, who's up for election to become Portland's next mayor. She's currently polling double digits ahead of Ted Wheeler, and I can't stand Ted Wheeler, but putting an avowed Antifa person in the mayor's office is not a good idea. This is her campaign manager. I am a communist, he says. All right, so we need honest judges, we need honest mayors, we need people that will respect the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. That's the only way we're going to win this battle, and it is a spiritual battle. You know it, I know it, our listeners know it, and I think people should support you because the profits from this film go to Whispering Ponies Ranch, which aids child abuse survivors. Can you tell people how they can get the movie?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for being willing to have me on. You would not believe the amount of resistance I've gotten from people, even in the conservative movement, people, friends of mine, even people that I've liked and respected, up until now, because, when somebody tells me in private, I'm not going to name names, but when somebody tells me, I can't have you on because I'll ruin my credibility, that I lost some respect there, because what in the movie, have me on, and if there's something you disagree with, let's talk about it. That's fine. And why are you worried about your credibility over children that are being abused? Thank you for being one of the very few. I mean, I sent you an email, and in like 5 minutes you responded back, and you're like, absolutely, let's have you on. I really want to talk about this. So thank you so much for making time for this. It is really important. If people want to get the film, they can do so. The best place is skywatchtvstore.com. And right now there's a big banner for it, but you get a whole bunch of bonus materials with it. You get a separate DVD documentary film with Stephen Bancars. That's the Pizzagate one. You also get an audio series that's over 12 hours long, filled with not only interviews from some of the guests of the movie, but also people that, due to COVID restrictions, we couldn't include in the film. People like Russ Dizdar, Greg Reed, William Ramsey, and several others. We even have a woman on there, Brie Marie Atkins, who used to be addicted to pornography. She's come out of it, and now she does ministry work helping people come out of pornography addictions. So it's a really good, it's a diverse audio series, but it all centers around this problem of sexual exploitation in our country. So that's along with it. There's a bonus DVD of the deleted scenes from the film that couldn't be included in the film. The film is 2 hours long, and altogether, I think if I put everything that we recorded in there, it would have been too big for a movie. So we included that in a separate disc. And then we also have the Occultism of Epstein Island audio series from Tom Horn. If people are familiar with Skywatch, they're familiar with Tom Horn, and that goes into everything that was found at Epstein Island from Tom Horn himself talking about this. So it's from his own words, talking about all the occultism and all those links on Epstein Island. And so we have all of that at skywatchtvstore.com. It's only a $35 donation to the ministry to get all that, so it's a pretty good deal. And again, I can't stress enough, all the profits go to Whispering Ponies Ranch, which help kids who have come out of sex trafficking. If people just want to stream the film, they can do that at Amazon. Just go to Amazon, search the film. It's called Silent Cry: The Darker Side of Trafficking. Just quickly, that doesn't mean that there's a lighter side to it. What it means is there's sex trafficking that, some people are kind of aware of, but there's this darker occult side that nobody talks about and is never reported in the mainstream media. So that's why we called it that. Search for it on Amazon. It's on IMDb. Please give it a rating. And that's what we're really asking for, is give it a rating and a review. If you feel we've earned 5 stars, please do that. We have something like 30 5-star reviews now. If you feel that we haven't earned that, then give an honest review. But we're trying to get as many reviews as we can because we want to convince Amazon. For one thing, we want to show Amazon and all these streaming companies, this is the kind of content we want to see on your platform. We don't want garbage like cuties sexually exploiting children. And just real quickly, the excuse that they gave for that film, the producers of that film, they said, well, we're trying to shine a light on the horrors of sexually exploiting children. You know what? I made a movie showing the horrors of sexually exploiting children, and I did not have to sexually exploit one child to do it. So that excuse that they gave is just garbage, but we're going to see more and more of that kind of stuff the more that people buy it. So let's shift it in the other direction, and let's show Amazon and all these streaming companies, you know what, we want actual, like, good information, wholesome, like, things that even the family can watch. We talk about dark things in the movie, but you can watch it with your family. You're not going to see a slasher film in it. This is the kind of thing that we want. Rate it on Amazon and show them that. If we get enough, I don't know what that magic number of ratings is, but if we get enough ratings, if we get enough people watching it and reviewing it on Amazon and IMDb, Amazon will put it in their new release category, and they will start suggesting it in the customers. If they do that, this thing can go global. It can get really big really fast. And we've seen that with some of these movies that deal with important issues like this. So that's what we're trying to do. Again, it's not about me or my fame. I don't care if my name is ever mentioned in it. It's not about me. It's about raising awareness for these children and getting them the help they need, because they're being abused every day and they don't think they have a hope. They don't think they have any hope. The average age of kids who are being trafficked is only 7 years, and a lot of them die by suicide. Imagine being under 7 years old and being suicidal because your day-to-day existence is just so horrific and abusive. Those are the kids that we're trying to help and that we're trying to raise awareness about. And I'm hoping that Silent Cry, the way that it was designed, the way that I made the film, was that this can be somebody's introduction into this area, and give everybody practical tips, practical advice, things that they can do at home that can really make a big difference. And the good thing is it doesn't even take a lot of effort. So people, please go get the movie. Please leave it a review and share it with your friends and family. Be a part of the solution and don't be a part of the problem anymore.
Absolutely. I've really enjoyed our time together today, Josh. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you again for having me on. Again, you are one of the few that's actually willing to do this, especially with the topic being what it is. But again, I want to applaud your bravery and just thank you for being a part of the solution and having me on and talking about this important issue.
We all got to do what we can do every single day. Push that boulder up the hill. Again, it's a spiritual battle, and you're a spiritual warrior, Josh. So thanks for all you're doing, man.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks again for having me on.
All right, my pleasure. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We very much appreciate your support. A shout out to our patrons and to the members over at sgtreport.tv. Thanks for keeping us in the fight for truth and real news. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. We appreciate you. God bless. Bye-bye.
I mean, we are at war. If you look at, we have border closings, travel restrictions. People were locked up at home on a political order. They have curfews. This is stuff we only know from war times. And so to me, I mean, this is, the government, every government is at war with its own people.